Hello everyone and welcome to the Pixel Art Workshop. This workshop originally took place on the 8th of October, as you could see there, and it was originally hosted by Enzo and Isabella, but because I'm stupid and I got my hard drive corrupted, we don't have the recording anymore. So this is my attempt to recreate what was originally presented. Anyway, this is going to be a fun one. Or rather, it was, but now that my recording slots will never know how fun it was. This presentation will begin as an informational presentation, and then we will put what we learned to practice and create our own art. So let's begin by asking ourselves, why should we learn pixel art? Pixel art is one of the simpler and more economical art styles one can pick up. What we mean by that is it's considered easier than the other art styles, although that's not to say that making pixel art is easy per se. Rather, the simplicity and lower resolution of pixel art means that it often requires less time and attention to detail. Additionally, many people find the aesthetic pleasing. People often consider classic low-res 2D video games to have visuals that age well, in comparison to something like early 3D like on the PS1 and N64. Many games nowadays will still try to recapture that aesthetic. So, speaking of which, let's take a look at some famous pixel art games. Of course, we have the original Super Mario Brothers. This was due to the technological constraints of the time in the late 1980s. And even into the 90s and early 2000s, we saw a lot of pixel art games. If you look on the right, you'll see Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Enzo really likes to show that game, and it's a good game. I see why he does. But he also likes to bring it up because it has examples of particularly fluid and complex pixel art. And even modern indie games will still try to go for the pixel art aesthetic. One such example is Stardew Valley, which takes many cues, both aesthetic and gameplay-wise, from the Harvest Moon games. So here are a couple things that you want to remember going in. Pixel art is different from other art forms because it has limits on how many pixels you could use. In other words, you have very limited space, so you need to make sure that you use it effectively so you can get across what you're trying to visualize. Even so, pixel art could still be just as effective or aesthetically pleasing as other art styles when you use it correctly. And although pixel art could be thought of as simpler than other art styles, that does not make it outright easy. All art is hard and takes time to learn. The best way to get better at these things is to keep at it and practice, so don't get discouraged. Here are a couple of methods that we have for drawing pixel art. One of them is freehand drawing. Enzo describes it as going in and starting to make shapes, feeling out the piece. You start with a rough idea of what you'd like to draw, and then you refine it and add more detail as you go on. This is the method that Enzo says he prefers. One other example is construction. You start out by drawing lines to direct the flow of motion, as Enzo puts it, where you basically use lines to lay out basic proportions of what you're trying to draw, and then you just build up on it from there. The way I look at this is similar to a concept called lines of action in gesture drawing, in which you construct a person's pose by drawing out a curve that captures the motion and the posture, and then you build from there. And last on this list is silhouette drawing. This is where you sketch out a basic outline of your object to create your foundation, and then you build upon that. I would say this is what I personally prefer. Here are a couple of things you should keep in mind when making pixel art. First, understand your limitations. In pixel art, you're limited to using a set of differently colored squares to represent your object, and these are the pixels that give it the name. Due to these limitations, you won't be able to fit in all the details. As such, every pixel counts as important in conveying your idea. Your goal is to get across the most amount of information in the limited amount of space that you have, and it's not also just the pixels that you put down that counts. You also have to keep in mind what you don't put down. They are also important in conveying your idea. It's it is recommended to think about things in terms of shapes. Rather than starting with line art and filling in the inside, many find it more intuitive to visualize the image as a series of shapes that make up a whole image. Pixel art space constraints make it especially important to consider what information is most vital to the piece. Considering what shapes make up the piece assists in filtering information, what's vital in making your idea recognizable. When I asked Enzo about the silhouette method of tackling pixel art in one of the previous slides, he emphasized that when you make your outline, you should be thinking in terms of what shapes you use to create your outline. And this is somewhat tangential, but this shape construction method can also apply to traditional art or other art forms. When I took an animation class in high school, we drew things with pencil and paper. We were taught to draw hands in terms of shapes. For example, the palm's made up of a hexagon, and each joint of the finger is a series of cylinders. We also recommend use references. As the old saying goes, good artists borrow, great artists steal. References are important for any kind of art, as evidenced in the character design workshop that went up recently. No art is truly original. All art's derived from something or another, be it from other art or for something in real life. Now, we're not saying you should go out and copy other people's work, but you're referencing other art pieces and seeing what makes them effective could help you in constructing and improving your own work. A second tip we'd like to describe is how to draw smooth lines. Making diagonals look smooth when you're restrained to only squares can be quite challenging because squares have the little pointy edges on the sides. So to make them look natural, you're going to want to use a specific kind of pixel pattern. So take a look at the examples, particularly the rightmost one on the top row and the leftmost one on the bottom row. The one on the bottom is only different by a single pixel, yet it looks notably more jagged than the one on the top. With how few pixels you have, just one can make a big difference. So when drawing diagonal lines, we're going to want our pixels to be diagonal, not directly adjacent to one another, in order to create the smoothest effect. Take a look at the lines on the left above the red X. Note how there are variable lengths of pixel rows per each line. For example, in the right line, the pattern of downward rows goes 2 pixels, then 4, then 2 again, and then 2 if you're going from left to right. This accentuates how jagged the lines are. We want our diagonals to have a consistent width, like the ones on the right above the green check mark. For example, on the leftmost line above the green check mark, it goes 2, then 2, then 2, then 2, then 2. All of them are 2, and that's more consistent. Now let's take a look at some of these quarter circles. The best way to create a smooth curve is to have increasing amounts of adjacent pixels. Let me explain what that means. Take a look at the curve above the red X. If you move upwards from the light blue diagonal thing that kind of splits it in half in symmetry, you have the 1 pixel on the blue line, and then you have 2, and then you have 1 again, and then it's 2 wide, and then, was this 7, 4? I'm not exactly sure. I think it's 4. But you can see how switching between 1 and 2 kind of makes it look a little bit lumpy. It kind of looks like it's sticking out in the middle. So let's take a look at the one above the green check mark. So you have 1 pixel on this line of symmetry, then you have 1, and then you have 2, and then 2 again, and then 4. And you can see from going from small to from like less wide to more wide, it looks a lot smoother than going less, more, less, more. Now, another tip is to avoid doubling pixels on curved lines, like the one above the red X. Doubling up on pixels around corners make things look smudged when zoomed out. Notice how the curve above the green check mark looks less jagged, and this is especially noticeable if you close your eyes. Now let's examine how to handle outlines in your drawings. There are 3 main ways to handle them. You could either have no outline, an outline with a solid colored, or colored outlines. If you're wondering, these can also be seen in some traditional hand-drawn art. So let's go over all of these and what they all look like in pixel art. So here's an example of no outline. I actually don't know what this is from, but you can see that the colors of the things that are used inside the sprite are the ones on the outside. So on the cape, it's red on the inside, but on the the outermost pixels are also red. Let's contrast this with a solid outline from the Mega Man games. So notice how in all the character sprites, there's a thick black, or not exactly black, but it's a very dark color outline that's surrounding the character. So in all of Mega Man sprites, you see, the edges are all black. Now, let's take a look at the colored outline, which is kind of an in-between of the previous 2 examples. So there are outlines, and they are darker in tone than the rest of the art, but they are just the same, or they're darker tones of what's within the borders. Also, Enzo says if you can name the tournament that the Street Fighter picture is used from, then you're cool. Comment with that. Put your guesses in the comments below. The 4th tip we'd like to provide is to start with only a few colors. While it might be tempting to start using everything, limiting yourself to just a few colors, a small focused color palette, will make it easier for you to understand the fundamentals and how to implement color into your drawings. In the drawing portion of this workshop, we will provide some palettes for you to use, and they're all 4 colors only. So here are a couple of techniques to make use of your limitations and create an image that feels smoother and more colorful. We have dithering and anti-aliasing. Dithering is to make use of checkerboard patterns to simulate smooth shadings, kind of like a gradient, and anti-aliasing is using differently toned pixels to better highlight shapes and to make things appear less jagged. So here are a couple of examples of dithering. We can see dithering gives the appearance of having a smooth, gradual transition between each color. Historically, this technique was most used frequently in Sega Genesis games due to their limited color palettes. Due to the nature of how old televisions and video cables kind of blended colors together, dithering looked especially smooth on those setups. If you're curious about this, look up some Sega Genesis dithering pictures. And let's take a look at some good and bad examples of dithering. Dithering, if you could sometimes overdo dithering and just make things look weird. So on the top row, if you look at the left side, wrong one. The right side, the pumpkin. Notice how it just kind of looks a little bit weird with all the weird checkerboardy things. It uses too much dithering. We're going to want to avoid that. You could also see this with the left rabbit on the bottom row. A lot of Sega Genesis games kind of overdid this bad dithering, and they do look a bit weird when played on more modern displays. So let's take a look at anti-aliasing now. If you've heard this term before in 3D games, like you go in your settings menu, you see, anti-aliasing. It's kind of a similar idea, where in 3D games, you want to lower the amount of jaggies, and we kind of want to do the same thing here in pixel art, make things look a little bit smoother and make colors pop out more. In each picture, the artist changed some of the pixel colors in the outer edges to be slightly darker. Now, this makes them look less pointy and makes the curves look more smooth. So, if you're familiar with FXAA in 3D anti-aliasing, it's kind of a similar idea. You want to make the color contrast between hard edges less extreme and make it seem more smooth. And I bring up FXAA specifically because it's the most similar to anti-aliasing here, because rather than analyzing everything in the image as a model, it just takes the static frame itself and treats it like a 2D image. And that's what we're doing here. And just like dithering, you don't want to overdo anti-aliasing or do too little of it. If you put in too much anti-aliasing, like the one on the right, you can see it just looks kind of blurry. And if you've ever played old pixel art games on an emulator and you turned smoothing on, that's kind of what it looks like. It just looks too blurry and it's not really recognizable. But if you do too little, edges will seem too rough and pointy. Think about when you play 3D games and you turn off anti-aliasing, and you notice some things just look kind of sharp and pointy. Now, all that said, now it's your turn. So for this workshop, we'll be using the website Piskel. It's available on piskelapp.com, and this is a free and easy-to-use web app that anyone can use for your projects. And additionally, we also have the palette right here. My monitor looks like 3 colors, but it's actually 4. So this is what we're going to be using. We will also have 2 others, or I think 3 others. And everything will be in the description. And additionally, there are some other options that you could use for pixel art. First is Pixel Studio on Steam. This is free, and I personally haven't used it before. The other one is Aseprite, also on Steam. This one costs $20. However, it's also open source, and if you can compile it yourself, you could use it without any cost. And I plan to we'll have a video on how to do that yourself if you're curious. Now, when the workshop was first presented, Enzo also made a video about pixel animation, or making animations in pixel art. And this is also useful, so check it out as well. We'll have a link in the description. So this was... not now. This was our presentation part of the workshop. Now, as for the demonstration part of the workshop in Piskel, I will be uploading that as a separate video, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. And either in tandem or alternatively, you could watch the Piskel, or not the Piskel version, the Aseprite version, where we will be compiling Aseprite and then creating a sprite in it as well. And I'll also go over the general basics of what we learned and how to put them into practice. So be sure to watch either both or one of the 2 videos to get a full understanding of the workshop. Anyways, thank you for watching the video, and see you next time.